Can you imagine your own father, tears in his eyes, calling your brother his greatest success, to a room full of people, while you, the one who actually built something from nothing, sat completely invisible in the back? What would you do when the universe finally decided to blow up his entire, twisted narrative? Because that's exactly what happened at my brother's engagement party, and it rewrote everything. Hey everyone, I'm Myra, and I'm a trauma surgeon at one of the biggest hospitals in Ohio. My parents spent $180,000 putting my brother through medical school and told me, to my face, that a woman's place was with her husband. If you've ever been overlooked, if someone decided your dreams weren't worth the investment, then this story is for you. My childhood was typical on the surface. A one-story house outside Dayton, Ohio. My dad, Frank Mercer, ran his own plumbing business, always smelled like copper and PVC. My mom, Janet, kept the house running like a silent, perfect machine. Meals at 6, church on Sundays. If you asked her opinion on anything, she'd just tilt her head towards my dad and say, "Your father knows best." My brother, Kyle, was 2 years older. He was a solid kid, good at football, fine at math. The kind adults called dependable. Nobody ever called him exceptional, but nobody needed to. He was the son. I was the one who stayed up late with a flashlight and the World Book Encyclopedia, dissecting old clocks, asking my science teacher so many questions she started lending me her own textbooks. When I scored the highest in the school on the state science exam in 7th grade, I brought the certificate home, buzzing with pride. My dad glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds. "Good," he said. "Now, go help your mother set the table." That same semester, Kyle got a B- in algebra, and Dad pinned it right on the refrigerator with a wrench magnet. That's when I started to learn where I stood. The summer I turned 18, I graduated high school as valedictorian with a perfect 4.0 GPA. I had 3 acceptance letters sitting on my desk: University of Cincinnati, Ohio State, and a small liberal arts college that offered partial aid. That same summer, Kyle got into the pre-med program at Ohio State. One night in July, Dad called us both to the kitchen table. He had a yellow legal pad, scribbled with numbers. Mom sat beside him, hands clasped. "Here's what we're going to do," Dad announced. He'd refinanced the house. He was pulling from his retirement account, 22 years of savings. Every single dollar, he said, was going toward Kyle's education. 4 years undergrad, 4 years med school. $180,000. He looked at Kyle the way some men look at a new truck they've been saving for. "This family," he declared, "is going to have a doctor." I waited. Then I asked, "What about me?" I got into 3 schools. Dad didn't even pause. Didn't flinch. He looked at me with what he probably thought was genuine kindness. "Myra, honey, a woman's place is with her husband. You don't need degrees. You need a good man who can provide." The kitchen was silent. The refrigerator hummed. I looked at my mother. She was nodding, slowly, automatically, just like she always did. Kyle stared at his plate, silent. He didn't argue. He didn't say a single word. "I had a 4.0, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He shrugged. "And your mother had a 3.8. Look at her. She's happy." My mother's fork hand tightened for just a second, then released. She said nothing. I walked upstairs. I didn't slam my door. I just sat at my desk, looking at those 3 acceptance letters, fanned out like a hand of cards I'd been told I couldn't play. I stayed up until 2 a.m., doing math on a napkin. Community college tuition, $2,400 a semester. I had $1,100 saved. I needed $1,300 more, plus rent, food, books. The next morning, I confronted him before he left for work. "I'll figure it out on my own." He chuckled, genuinely amused. "With what money, sweetheart?" "I'll work." He shook his head. "We can only invest in one future. Kyle's going to be a doctor. That's the family's ticket." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then I'll invest in my own." He just picked up his coffee and walked out to his truck. I think he gave me 3 months before I'd come back begging for help. Within a week, I had 3 jobs. 5 a.m. at Grader's Bakery, hauling flour bags. 9 to 5 as a receptionist at a dental office, studying anatomy flashcards between calls. 6 to 11 as a waitress at a diner, pouring coffee for truckers until my feet went numb. I taped my schedule inside my closet door. 3 columns, 3 jobs, 3 hourly wages. At the bottom I wrote, community college fall semester, $2,400. I moved out of my parents' house that same week, into a tiny studio apartment. Dad didn't try to stop me. He figured reality would. My first year at Sinclair Community College, I took 15 credits a semester, pre-med track, while working 55 hours a week. I learned to study in the cracks, flashcards in my apron pocket, textbooks propped behind the phone, notes taped to my dashboard for red lights. I averaged 4.5 hours of sleep a night. My hands smelled like flour, latex, and fryer grease. And I kept a 4.0. My chemistry professor, Dr. Ulrich, pulled me aside one day. "You're the best student I've had in 12 years, he said. "Why are you here, and not a university?" I told him I was working on that. I called my mother once that semester. She picked up. "How are you, honey?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm taking organic chemistry." There was a pause. "Your brother got an A in anatomy," she said. She didn't ask about my classes. She didn't ask if I was eating, or sleeping, or if I was okay. "That's great for Kyle," I said. "Tell him congratulations." She said she would. Then she had to go. Dinner was getting cold. I hung up, sitting on the edge of my bed in my studio apartment that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner. That was the last time I called home first. Halfway through my second year, I applied to transfer to the University of Cincinnati's pre-med program. I got in, with a partial academic scholarship. I packed my studio apartment into the back of my beat-up Honda Civic and drove 2 hours north. New city, new apartment, even smaller, above a laundromat that ran until midnight. That Thanksgiving, I wasn't invited home. I found out later from a cousin's Facebook post that the whole family gathered at my parents' house. Kyle flew in from Columbus, where he was in his second year of med school. In the photo, he was at the head of the table, flanked by Mom and Dad, everyone smiling. My grandmother, Ruth, Dad's mother, sent me a separate message. "Where were you today?" I told her I was studying. She sent back a heart emoji. She was 75 and had just figured out how to use them. I ate Thanksgiving dinner alone, Kraft mac and cheese, standing at the counter, with my organic chemistry textbook open because the Krebs cycle doesn't care about holidays. Meanwhile, Kyle was starting to struggle. He tried to hide it, but his first attempt at the USMLE Step 1 exam didn't go well. He retook it and barely passed. The family never heard about that. The following Christmas, I did go home, not for my parents, but for Grandma Ruth. She'd asked me directly, and I couldn't say no to the one person who remembered my birthday when my own parents forgot. The house was packed. Kyle's med school class photo was framed on the mantel, next to his high school senior portrait. No photos of me anywhere. During dinner, Dad held court. Kyle sat beside him, comfortable, well-fed, his tuition paid. Aunt Helen's daughter-in-law, a woman I barely knew, turned to me. "So, Myra, what are you up to these days?" Before I could even open my mouth, Dad's voice cut across the table. "She's keeping busy, working a few little jobs. You know how it is. She'll settle down when she meets the right guy." The table nodded. Forks returned to plates. Nobody followed up. I was 20 years old, carrying a 3.97 GPA in pre-med at UC, and my father had just introduced me to the family as a girl waiting for a husband. I cut my ham and said nothing. After dinner, I was washing dishes. Grandma Ruth came in, moving slowly. She stood beside me and spoke quietly. "Your grandpa did the same thing to your Aunt Lorraine. She proved him wrong." She paused. "You will, too." She patted my arm and shuffled back to the living room. Ruth was the only person in that house who knew I was in college. She never told a soul. That was our deal. 2 years later, I graduated from the University of Cincinnati, summa cum laude, top 1% of the pre-med program. My GPA was 3.98. I'd published a research paper with my mentor, Dr. Patricia Holden, a biochemistry professor who'd spotted me in her lecture hall sophomore year and decided I was worth her time. She was the first person in my academic life who treated my ambition like it belonged to me. Dr. Holden wrote my medical school recommendation letter. She told me later it was the one she was most proud of out of 600. I applied to Ohio State College of Medicine, the same school that had cashed my father's $180,000 for Kyle. I got in. Full scholarship, academic merit. The acceptance packet came in a thick white envelope. I held it in my apartment kitchen, standing in a square of morning light, and read it twice. I almost called my mother. I picked up my phone, scrolled to her name, and stopped. I put the phone down. She'd find out when she was ready to ask. Graduation day. May, clear sky. 2,000 people. I walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand. No one from my family was there. But Dr. Holden was. She'd driven 2 hours from Cincinnati. She stood up in the middle section and clapped, hands above her head. I saw her from the stage. I nodded. That was enough. Afterward, I walked to my car alone, holding the diploma. I sat behind the wheel, looked at it, started the engine, and drove to med school orientation the next week. My father spent $180,000 to make my brother a doctor. My scholarship letter came with a single line: full tuition awarded on academic merit. I didn't frame it. I folded it into my wallet and carried it every day. Not as a trophy, but as proof that the investment my father refused to make, someone else made, on the strength of my transcript alone. If this story is hitting close to home for you, seriously, hit that subscribe button. Because it gets heavier from here. Medical school at Ohio State was a different kind of hard. Not financial. The scholarship covered tuition, and I took modest loans for living expenses. This was the kind of hard that tested if you could hold a retractor for 4 hours without your hand shaking. If you could memorize every branch of the brachial plexus and recall it at 2 a.m. If you could stand in a cadaver lab on your first day and not flinch. I didn't flinch. I was 26, older than most of my classmates. They'd come straight from undergrad, funded by parents or trust funds. I was the one who still carried flour dust in the seams of her backpack from the bakery years. I chose the surgery track early. My anatomy professor told me I had the steadiest hands he'd seen in a decade. I didn't know what to do with the compliment, so I just kept cutting. Second year, I walked past the departmental hallway where they displayed photos of distinguished alumni. I looked for Kyle's name on the honor boards, the research awards, the clinical excellence lists. He wasn't on any of them. He'd graduated, gotten his MD, but he hadn't left a mark on any wall. I didn't feel satisfaction when I noticed that. I felt something more like confirmation that $180,000 had bought him a degree, not a distinction. I, on the other hand, was starting to leave marks. My surgery rotation evaluations came back with the word exceptional written in 3 separate attending physicians' notes. I taped nothing to any wall. I just kept going. Kyle graduated from medical school 4 years before I did. He barely made it through the USMLE Step 1, the exam that basically determines your career trajectory. He failed at his first attempt, retook it, passed with a score that closed every competitive residency door in the country. Surgery, dermatology, orthopedics, all out of reach. He matched into a family medicine residency at a community hospital outside Dayton. 3 years later, he was a general practitioner at a strip mall clinic in Kettering. He saw patients for sinus infections, blood pressure refills, annual physicals. It was honest work, perfectly respectable. But it was not what $180,000 was supposed to buy. My father never acknowledged any of this. To him, Kyle was my son, the doctor. He said it at church. He said it at Rotary Club. He said it to the cashier at the hardware store who didn't ask. Kyle's medical school graduation photo sat above the fireplace mantel in a gold frame, right where my science certificate should have hung 20 years earlier. When neighbor Larry asked Frank what kind of doctor Kyle was, Frank said, "He does surgeries." Kyle did checkups. I was the one who did surgeries. But Frank didn't know that because Frank had stopped asking about me a long time ago. The last photo of me in that house was my high school graduation portrait. After the phone call, the one I'll tell you about, Dad took it down. Put it in a drawer somewhere. My mother might have known where. She never said. The mantel belonged to Kyle now. The rest of the wall belonged to the version of the family my father had decided to tell. The phone call happened during my second year of med school. I was 28, sitting in my apartment in Columbus, reviewing surgical anatomy slides. Dad's name popped up on my phone. He hadn't called in over a year. I answered. His voice was flat. Business tone. "No hello. No how are you?" "Kyle needs money," he said. "Residency application fees, interview travel, relocation deposits." It added up. "Family supports family," he insisted. "We can only invest in one future, and right now he needs a hand." There it was again. The same sentence from the kitchen table 10 years later, wearing a different coat. You invested in his future, Dad, I said. Not mine. So, invest in his current problem, too. He sighed. Don't be selfish, Myra. You're working your little jobs. Kyle needs. I'm in medical school. I cut him off. On a full scholarship. At the same university you paid for Kyle to attend. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to hear the ice shift in his glass. Don't lie to me, he said. I'm not lying. Ask the registrar. Ask anyone. I hung up. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to my slides. I expected a call from Mom, a text from Kyle, something. What I got was silence. Complete, airtight silence. Dad never called Ohio State to verify. He never asked a neighbor or a cousin to check. Because checking meant risking the chance that I was telling the truth. And if I was, his entire story about why his daughter didn't deserve an education would collapse. It was easier to believe I was lying. People protect their narratives the way they protect their houses. They'd rather board up the windows than look outside. After that phone call, the family line went dead. 2 weeks of nothing. Then a voicemail from my mother. Her voice had that careful, practiced quality, the same tone she used when explaining to church friends why she couldn't host the potluck. Myra, I don't know what you told your father, but you've really hurt him. Whatever you're doing out there, I hope you're happy. You're tearing this family apart. I listened once, deleted it. A day later, Kyle texted. Thanks for upsetting Dad. Real mature. Then, a few seconds later. Also, who told you about my USMLE scores? I stared at that second text for a long time. Nobody had told me about his scores. I'd looked them up myself on the medical board's verification site, public record. But the fact that Kyle's first instinct was paranoia told me everything. He knew his record was thin. He knew the investment hadn't paid the dividends Frank advertised, and he was terrified someone might do the math. I didn't respond to any of them. I set my phone on the nightstand, went to the hospital for my surgical rotation, and spent the next 8 hours learning to tie sutures with one hand. I ate lunch alone. I studied alone. I went home to an apartment that was clean, functional, and empty. A single photo on the fridge. Me and Grandma Ruth at Christmas, the last one we'd spent together. She was the only family I still spoke to. She called every few weeks. They're angry, she'd say. But I'm proud of you. Finish what you started, sweetheart. Ruth was 81 then. Arthritis in both hands. She could barely hold the phone. She held it anyway. I graduated from medical school on a Saturday in May. Bright sun, packed auditorium. My family wasn't there. No flowers, no balloons, no grandmother in the third row, though Ruth had wanted to come. Her niece wouldn't let her make the drive. She sent a card instead. Inside, in shaky handwriting, Dr. Myra Mercer. I always knew. Dr. Holden came. She drove 2 hours, wore a blue blazer, and sat where she had a clear view of the stage. When the dean called my name, Myra Elizabeth Mercer, Doctor of Medicine, with distinction, she stood up. Not polite clapping. Real clapping, hands above her head. Some of my classmates stood, too. They knew pieces of my story, the 3 jobs, the community college start, the scholarship. They'd filled in the gaps with their own imaginations, which were probably kinder than the truth. After the ceremony, Dr. Holden found me. She held my shoulders and said, Now go save some lives, and call me when you scrub in for your first solo surgery. I told her I would. I drove back to my apartment that evening, opened a $15 Merlot I'd been saving. I poured 1 glass, sat at my kitchen table, and drank it slowly as the sun went down. The apartment was quiet. No one called, no one texted. I finished the glass, washed it, set it on the drying rack, and went to bed. Surgical residency started in 3 weeks. I needed the sleep. I matched into the surgery residency program at Cleveland Clinic. 5 years, 80-hour weeks, the kind of schedule that turns your circadian rhythm into a suggestion and your social life into a rumor. I specialized in trauma surgery, the department that gets the calls nobody else wants at 3 a.m. Car accidents, stabbings, falls from scaffolding, the full catalog of ways a body can break. My attending told me during my first year that I had the right temperament for it. You don't panic, she said. That's half the job. I didn't tell her I'd been trained not to panic in a kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, where showing emotion meant losing. By my 3rd year, I had a reputation. Calm hands, clean decisions, efficient. The nurses on the trauma floor called me the quiet one because I barely spoke in the break room, but gave clear, steady orders when a gurney came crashing through the doors. One freezing February night, a young woman came in by helicopter. 28 years old, car versus pickup truck on Route 8. Ruptured spleen, lacerated liver, for broken ribs, collapsed lung. Unconscious. I scrubbed in at 9:14 p.m. and didn't step out of the operating room until 3:20 a.m. 6 hours. I stayed until her vitals stabilized, then slept for 40 minutes in the call room. Her name was Elise Warren. She was an elementary school teacher from Dayton. She spent 2 weeks in the ICU, 3 months in recovery. By the time she was discharged, I was on to the next case. I didn't know Elise's story. She didn't know mine. But she asked the nurses who had saved her. They said, Dr. Mercer, near the end of my 5th year of residency, I needed my original birth certificate for credentialing paperwork at a hospital in Columbus. The original was at my parents' house. I drove to Dayton on a Sunday morning, knowing Frank and Janet would be at the 10:30 service. I still had my old house key. The house was quiet. Same carpet, same wallpaper, same smell, coffee grounds and lemon pledge. I went to the attic access in the hallway ceiling, pulled down the folding ladder. The attic was hot and dusty, packed with boxes labeled in my mother's precise handwriting. I found the one marked, important documents. My birth certificate was on top, but underneath it, in a yellow envelope spotted with age, I found something I wasn't looking for. An acceptance letter from Sinclair Community College School of Nursing, dated September 1985. Addressed to Janet Marie Callahan, my mother's maiden name. Below it, a tuition receipt for the first semester, $600 marked paid. And beneath that, a handwritten note on lined paper, the ink faded brown. Your brother needs the money more. You'll be married soon enough. Don't be difficult. The handwriting slanted to the right, heavy pressed, confident. It looked like my father's. It wasn't. It was my mother's father's. But the penmanship was close enough to make my stomach drop. I stood there in the attic heat, dust floating in the light from the small window. My mother had been accepted to nursing school at 19. Her parents pulled the funding for her brother. She never went back. 40 years later, she sat at a kitchen table and nodded while her husband did the exact same thing to her daughter. I put the letter back in the envelope, closed the box, returned it, folded the ladder, took my birth certificate, locked the front door, and drove away. On the highway back to Cleveland, I thought about my mother at 19. Janet Callahan, accepted into nursing school, ready to start, until her father decided her brother's future was worth more. She married Frank Mercer 2 years later. Never went back to school. Raised 2 kids, kept a spotless house, and defended the system that had crushed her own ambition. Because admitting it was wrong would mean admitting she'd lost 40 years to a lie. I understood her then. Not forgave. Understood. When I told her I wanted to go to college, and she nodded along with my father's speech about a woman's place, she wasn't choosing Frank's side. She was choosing her own survival. If my dreams were valid, then hers had been stolen. If a daughter could do what she couldn't, then everything Janet had told herself about her life, that it was enough, that it was the right choice, that she was happy, would disintegrate. She couldn't afford that. So, she enforced the same pattern, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I stopped at a gas station, bought a coffee, stood in the parking lot looking at a cornfield going gold in the late afternoon. Somewhere in that house in Dayton, my mother had once dreamed of wearing scrubs and taking pulses. Now she folded towels and defended the man who told her she didn't need it. I drove back to Cleveland and didn't speak of it. 2 years passed. I finished residency, accepted an attending position in Columbus, and moved into a 1-bedroom apartment 6 minutes from the hospital. Grant Medical Center, Division of Trauma Surgery. My name went on the department directory, the hospital website, a small placard outside the OR, Dr. Myra E. Mercer. I was 32. I operated 4 days a week, ran the Tuesday morning morbidity and mortality conference, and mentored 2 surgical residents who reminded me of myself. Quiet, sharp, nobody's first choice until they outperformed everyone else's. I had 2 people I'd call friends, Dr. Holden and Dana, a surgical nurse at Grant who could predict which instrument I'd ask for before I asked. Dana was blunt, funny, and the only person who could make me laugh in the scrub room. My apartment looked like a surgeon lived there. Functional, Minimal, more medical journals than furniture. I cooked simple meals, ran 4 miles 3 mornings a week, and went to bed by 10. I didn't date, not because I was opposed to it, but because I didn't have the bandwidth for a relationship that required explanation. My story was heavy, and most first dates couldn't carry it past appetizers. 6 months before Kyle's engagement party, Grandma Ruth died. 87 years old. Congestive heart failure. I drove to Dayton for the funeral. Frank shook my hand like I was a colleague from Rotary. Kyle nodded from across the room. Janet hugged me quick, stiff, then released. Nobody asked what I did for a living. Nobody asked anything at all. I stood at Ruth's casket and thought, I've been grieving this family longer than I've been grieving you. And I think Ruth would have understood exactly what I meant. Kyle was 35. His clinic in Kettering had a waiting room with plastic chairs and a mounted TV playing daytime television. He saw patients from 8 to 5, routine checkups, blood draws. He wasn't bad at his job. He was fine, adequate, the kind of doctor you see when you need a signature on a work absence form. Dad still called him, my son the doctor, with the conviction of a man selling the last used car on the lot. At church, at the grocery store, at the barber shop. Did I tell you Kyle just handled a tough case? Kyle handled flu season. I handled ruptured aortas. But Frank wouldn't have known that. My photo had been gone from the house for years. Kyle's med school portrait still commanded the mantel. The wall told the story Frank wanted. One child, one success, one investment that paid off. The other child didn't exist. Kyle met Elise Warren at a church social about 10 months before the engagement party. She was a third-grade teacher. She transferred to a school in Kettering after recovering from a serious car accident that had nearly killed her. They fell for each other quickly. Elise was warm, open. Kyle told her about his family in broad strokes. He mentioned a sister once. We're not close. She does odd jobs out of town. Kind of went off on her own. Elise didn't press. She figured family stuff was complicated. She didn't yet know how specifically it was complicated. My father remortgaged his house and spent his retirement to make my brother a doctor. My brother does physicals at a strip mall clinic. I spent 15 years paying my own way, and I perform trauma surgeries for a living. But here's the thing about families like mine. The truth doesn't matter until someone else tells it. And someone was about to. Stay with me. Let me tell you about Elise. After the accident, after the surgery, after 3 months of recovery where she had to relearn how to walk without wincing, Elise did what a lot of grateful people do. She tried to find the person who saved her. She asked the nurses at Cleveland Clinic. They told her the surgeon's name, Dr. Mercer. She looked it up on the hospital's website, found my photo, my bio, my credentials. Dr. Myra E. Mercer, attending surgeon, Division of Trauma Surgery. She saved the page. She wrote a thank you card, handwritten on cream-colored stationery, and mailed it to the hospital. I never saw it. It went to the general correspondence office, got filed in a folder, and sat there alongside 100 other patient letters that surgeons never have time to read. Elise moved on. She healed. She went back to teaching. She started running again. She met Kyle at the church social. He was charming in a simple way. Steady job, decent smile, liked to grill on weekends. He introduced himself as Dr. Kyle Mercer, and she thought of the name for a moment, but let it pass. Mercer wasn't uncommon in Ohio. Kyle never brought up a sister in any meaningful way. When Elise asked about his family, he said his parents were great, his dad a hard-working plumber, his mom devoted. Any siblings? She asked. A sister, Kyle said. We don't really talk. She works somewhere out of state. Retail, I think. Elise didn't question it. She had no reason to. And so, for 10 months, she and Kyle built a relationship on a foundation that had a crack running straight through the middle, one he'd sealed with a lie about a waitress who was actually a surgeon. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was between surgeries, sitting in the break room, eating a turkey sandwich when my phone buzzed. Kyle's name. I hadn't seen it on my screen since a snarky text about upsetting Dad years ago. Engagement party June 14th at Rossetti's. 6 p.m. Dad wants the whole family there. Don't make it about you. I read it twice. First time for content, second time for tone. Don't make it about you. As if showing up to a dinner was a declaration of war. As if my presence, quiet, polite at the back table, was somehow a threat to the celebration. I set the sandwich down. Dana walked in, saw my face, You look like you just read a bad lab result. My brother's getting engaged, I said. Oh, that's nice. Are you going? He told me not to make it about me. Dana poured herself a coffee. What does that even mean? It means he's afraid I'll exist too loudly. I stared at the text for another minute. I could ignore it. I'd ignored everything else. The voicemails, the silence, the erasure. Ignoring was easy. It was a skill I'd perfected alongside scalpel technique. But something about that last line, "Don't make it about you," sat wrong. Not because they were hurtful, but because they were an admission. Kyle wouldn't have written that sentence if he didn't believe my existence could overshadow his moment. He was afraid of what, exactly? Of the truth? Of the comparison? Of the woman his family had written out of a story, walking back into the room. I typed congratulations. I'll be there. Hit send. Finish my sandwich. Went back to the OR and saved a man's kidney. I spent the next 2 weeks not preparing a speech, not planning a confrontation, not rehearsing a single devastating line. I had no agenda. I just had a decision. I would walk into that restaurant because I was done letting other people's discomfort decide where I was allowed to stand. I called Dr. Holden the night before. I'm going to my brother's engagement party, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Do you want to go? I want to stop being afraid of a room full of people who don't know me. Then go, she said. And Myra, wear something that makes you feel like a surgeon. The next morning, I drove to a department store and bought a simple navy dress. Fitted professional. Nothing flashy. Low heels, small earrings. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment and looked at the woman looking back. 33 years old. Bags under her eyes from a 70-hour week. Calluses on her right index finger from thousands of hours holding surgical instruments. Posture straight, because she'd spent half her adult life standing over an operating table. I didn't look rich. I didn't look glamorous. I looked like someone who'd been working since 5 a.m. on a Saturday for the last 15 years, which is exactly what I was. I didn't bring a gift. I didn't bring a date. I didn't bring evidence or documents or any kind of proof. I wasn't there to prove anything. I was there to occupy my own space in a room that had been arranged without me. The drive from Columbus to Dayton took an hour and 40 minutes. I listened to the radio. I didn't rehearse a thing. Rossetti's was an Italian restaurant on the east side of Dayton, with a private room in the back that could seat about 50. When I walked in, the hostess pointed me toward the party. I could hear the noise before I saw the room. Glasses clinking, laughter, Frank's voice above it all, telling some story about Kyle's first stethoscope. The room was decorated with white tablecloths and small flower arrangements. About 40 people. I recognized most of them. My mother was near the front table, adjusting a flower arrangement that didn't need adjusting. She looked up and saw me, a flicker across her face. Surprise, followed by something she smoothed over quickly. Oh, you came. Kyle invited me, I said. Well, she turned back to the flowers. Sit anywhere. I found my father at the bar with Uncle Gary, a bourbon in hand. He saw me, gave a single nod, no words, turned back to his drink. Kyle spotted me from across the room. His jaw tightened. He walked over with Elise on his arm. Elise, this is my sister Myra. Myra, this is Elise. Elise smiled. A real smile, warm and immediate. She took my hand and shook it. It's so nice to finally meet you, she said. And then something happened behind her eyes. A flicker. A pause. She looked at my face. Really looked. The way you look at someone you've seen before but can't quite place. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then Kyle pulled her toward another group of guests, and the moment dissolved. I found a table near the back, sat down alone, unfolded my napkin. Dinner was chicken parmesan and a garden salad. I sat with distant cousins I hadn't seen since Grandma Ruth's funeral, and a couple from Janet's church group who introduced themselves as the Goodwins. Mrs. Goodwin was pleasant, in the way that church women in small Ohio towns are pleasant. She asked questions the way she arranged casseroles, with care and no real expectation of depth. So you're Kyle's sister, she said, buttering a roll. What do you do, dear? I opened my mouth to answer, and my father's voice came from the next table like a reflex. She's doing fine, keeping busy. Mrs. Goodwin smiled and said, That's nice. She didn't ask a follow-up. The conversation moved to Kyle's new house and whether he and Elise were thinking about kids. I ate my chicken. Across the room, I noticed Elise glancing in my direction. Not casually. She was studying me, the way you study someone you're trying to remember. She'd tilt her head slightly, then look away, then look back. Kyle noticed. I could tell because he leaned toward her and said something low, close to her ear. Whatever it was made Elise frown. She said something back. He shook his head. She let it go, but her eyes came back to me one more time before the plates were cleared. I didn't return the look. I finished my dinner, set my fork on the plate, and folded my hands in my lap. The room was getting louder. Dessert was coming, and I could feel the energy shifting the way it does before a speech. Someone was about to stand up, tap a glass, and say something important. I already knew who it would be. Just before dessert, Elise excused herself to the restroom. She walked through the main dining area, past the front counter, and down the short hallway. On the wall by the restrooms, Rossetti's kept a community board. The kind you see in every small-town restaurant in Ohio, business cards, church bulletins, Little League sign-up sheets, and newspaper clippings. The Dayton Daily News had run a local interest feature 4 months earlier about an Ohio surgeon who'd received a statewide award. The headline read, "Kettering native honored, Dr. Myra Mercer receives Ohio Surgical Excellence Award." There was a photo, professional headshot, white coat, hospital badge visible. Elise stopped walking. She stood in front of that community board, one hand on the wall, and read the clipping twice. Dr. Myra Mercer, originally from Kettering, trauma surgeon. The same face she'd just shaken hands with. The same last name as the man she was engaged to. The same Dr. Mercer, whose name was on her hospital discharge papers. Whose face she'd memorized from the Cleveland Clinic website. Whose thank you card she'd mailed to a general mailbox 2 years ago. She looked toward the private room. Through the glass partition, she could see Frank standing up, adjusting his tie, reaching for his glass. Kyle sitting straight, my mother touching Frank's arm, and me, at the back table, hands in my lap. Elise walked slowly back to the private room. She sat down beside Kyle. Her face was different now. Not angry. Resolved. Kyle touched her hand. "You okay, babe?" "Fine," she said. Her voice was even. Teacher even. The kind of calm that comes from standing in front of 38-year-olds and maintaining order. "Your dad's about to speak." Frank stood up. He tapped his glass with a fork. The room quieted. He cleared his throat. He had tears in his eyes already, the kind that came from bourbon and pride in equal measure. "I want to say a few words about my son," he began. His voice shook, but he steadied it. "When Kyle was 18 years old, Janet and I sat down at our kitchen table and made the biggest financial decision of our lives. I refinanced the house. I cashed in half my retirement, money I'd been putting away since I was working at the union. 22 years of savings. Every dollar went into our son's education." He looked at Kyle. $180,000. People told us we were crazy, that we couldn't afford it, that it was too much for one family to put into one kid. He smiled. But we knew. We knew that investing in Kyle was the right call. And now look at him. Frank's voice broke. He lifted his glass. A doctor. A healer. The first professional in the Mercer family. Kyle Mercer, our greatest success. The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Glasses raised. Uncle Gary whistled. Aunt Helen clapped, her rings clinking. Janet sat beside Frank, hands clasped under her chin, beaming the way she beamed at everything Frank said. Automatically. Loyally. The way she'd been beaming for 40 years. Kyle stood to hug his father. The room cheered louder. I did not raise my glass. I did not look down. I looked directly at my father, at the man who'd spent $180,000 on a career he could brag about, and zero on a career that actually saved lives. And I kept my face perfectly still. Elise did not clap. She was looking at me. Elise stood up. The room was still buzzing from Frank's toast when she pushed her chair back and straightened her shoulders. Kyle reached for her hand. "Babe, you don't have to make a speech." "I want to," she said. She smiled at him, but it was the kind of smile a teacher gives a child who's about to learn something difficult. The room shifted its attention. Here was the fiancée, standing to deliver her own toast. Charming, expected. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer," Elise said, her voice carrying clearly. "That was a beautiful speech. I'd like to add something, if you don't mind." Frank nodded, still wiping his eyes. 2 years ago, Elise began, I was driving home from a school fundraiser. A pickup truck ran a red light on Route 8. I don't remember the impact. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU at Cleveland Clinic with a ruptured spleen, a lacerated liver, 4 broken ribs, and a collapsed lung. The room went silent. Not respectful silence. The kind of silence that comes when someone starts a story you weren't prepared to hear. Kyle's smile faded. He knew the story. He'd heard it on their 3rd date. But Elise had never told it in public, and she'd never told it with this expression. Calm, measured, building toward something. The surgeon who saved my life operated on me for 6 hours, Elise continued. She stayed past her shift. The nurses told me she didn't leave the hospital until my vitals stabilized at 3 o'clock in the morning. Elise paused. She looked around the room. At the aunts, the cousins, the church friends, the colleagues. She looked at Frank, still standing with his glass half raised. She looked at Janet, whose hands were now flat on the table. Then she turned toward the back of the room. Toward me. I looked up that surgeon afterward, she said. I memorized her face. I wrote her a thank you card I was never sure she received. And tonight, I saw her sitting right there. 40 heads turned. I felt every pair of eyes land on me like a shift in barometric pressure. Elise's voice didn't waver. Dr. Mercer. Dr. Myra Mercer, attending surgeon, Division of Trauma Surgery, Grant Medical Center in Columbus. She was looking at me now, with an expression I'd seen before on patients' faces when they wake up after surgery and realize they're still alive. Gratitude that goes past words. You saved my life, she said. The room cracked open. Not loudly. There was no gasp, no dramatic intake of breath. It was more like the sound of 40 people recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Whispers started at the edges. Cousin Martha leaned to her husband. Did she say doctor? Mrs. Goodwin set down her dessert fork. Aunt Helen looked at Frank with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not confusion exactly, but something close to arithmetic, like she was adding up years of conversations and finding the sum didn't balance. Wait, Uncle Gary said, loud enough for the room to hear. Myra's a surgeon. Kyle stood up. His chair scraped the floor. Elise, what are you doing? Kyle. Elise's voice again. Same tone. The tone that stops a classroom. Sit down. He sat. Not because he agreed, but because he didn't know what else to do. Frank tried next. He set his glass on the table with exaggerated care, like a man trying to prove his hands weren't shaking. We always knew Myra was capable, he said. She made her own choices, and we respected that. The sentence collapsed under its own weight before he finished it. Nobody helped him. Mrs. Goodwin turned to Janet. You never told us your daughter was a surgeon, Janet. Janet said nothing. Tears ran down her face, dropping onto the tablecloth, where her hands still pressed flat. She stared at the white linen like it held instructions she couldn't read. Elise's father, a quiet man I hadn't noticed until that moment, stood up from the far table. Tall, silver-haired, with the weathered hands of someone who'd worked outdoors his whole life. He picked up his glass. I'd like to raise a toast, he said. To Dr. Mercer. He looked at me. You gave me my daughter back. I don't have $180,000, but I have this. He lifted his glass. Around the room, hands went up slowly, unevenly. Some confused, some genuine, some looking at Frank with the particular expression people wear when they realize they've been told a story that wasn't true. I didn't lift a glass. I stood, smoothed my dress. I didn't come here to take anything from Kyle's night, I said. Congratulations to you both. I looked at Elise. I'm glad you're well. That's what matters. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. I didn't rush. I didn't linger. I walked through the room the same way I walk through a hospital corridor after a long surgery. Steady, straight, one foot in front of the other. Nobody stopped me. Nobody tried. As I passed through the doorway into the main restaurant, I heard the sounds behind me fracture into pieces. Frank's voice, cracked and defensive. Janet, did you know about this? Kyle, louder. This is insane. She ruined everything. She always does this. And Elise, clear as a school bell, you lied to me, Kyle. About your own sister. For 10 months. I didn't turn around. I walked past the community board in the hallway, past the newspaper clipping with my photo, past the hostess who smiled at me without knowing she just witnessed the quiet demolition of a 15-year lie. The front door opened into June night air. Warm. Humid. The way Ohio gets in the middle of summer. The parking lot was half full. Cicadas hummed in the trees. Rossetti's neon sign buzzed red and green. I walked to my car, keys in hand. I was not shaking. I was breathing deep, slow. The kind of breath you take after you've been holding one for a very long time. I noticed a small spot of red sauce on my sleeve from dinner. Tomato, probably from the chicken parmesan. I thought, that'll need cold water. I got in my car, sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. The restaurant noise was muffled now, a low hum behind brick walls. I started the engine. I drove out of the parking lot, turned left onto Far Hills Avenue, and headed east toward Columbus. I didn't speed. I just drove. The next morning, my phone showed 23 missed calls. Frank had called 4 times, all between 11 p.m. and midnight, the bourbon hours. Janet called 7 times, starting early the next morning. Kyle called 3 times. The rest were relatives. Aunt Helen, Cousin Martha, a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Mrs. Goodwin from church. I didn't return any of them. I drove to the hospital, changed into scrubs, and operated on a 16-year-old whose appendix had burst at a baseball game. Routine procedure, clean work. The kind of day that reminds you why you spent 15 years becoming this. 2 days later, a letter arrived at my apartment. Handwritten, on cream-colored stationery from Elise. Dear Dr. Mercer, I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. Kyle never told me the truth about you. I asked him directly after the party, and he admitted he knew you were a surgeon. He'd known for years. And he lied to me, to his friends, to everyone. I've called off the engagement, not just because of the lie, but because of what the lie told me about the kind of man I was building a life with. A man who can erase his own sister to protect his ego is not someone I want raising my children. Thank you again for saving my life. I hope someday your family sees what I see. Elise. I read it at the kitchen counter, folded it, and put it in the top drawer of my desk next to my scholarship letter from Ohio State. 2 pieces of paper, years apart, that said the same thing. Someone saw me clearly when my own family wouldn't. 1 week after the party, Janet called. I almost didn't pick up. I was on the couch with a journal article about laparoscopic trauma repair, and the phone buzzed face down on the coffee table. I stared at it for 2 rings. 3. Then I answered. Her voice was different. Smaller. Not the practiced, guilt-trip voice. Not the passive-aggressive voicemail voice. Something raw, like fabric that's been folded so long it cracked when you opened it. Myra. Long pause. I found something in the attic. My old acceptance letter from Sinclair. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing. You saw it, didn't you? When you came for your birth certificate. Yes, I said. I could have been a nurse. Her voice broke on the word nurse. A crack that ran all the way down to 1985. I should have fought harder. For myself. And for you. I sat with that sentence for a moment. 40 years of silence. And this was what came through the wall. You still can fight, Mom, I said. For yourself. But that's your choice. Not mine. We hung up. No dramatic goodbye. No crying together. No promise to fix everything. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was a crack in a wall that had stood for 40 years. Thin enough to see light through. Too narrow to walk through yet. Maybe Janet would widen it. Maybe she wouldn't. That was her work, not mine. Frank didn't call. A week later, I was sitting in the hospital break room at the end of a 12-hour shift. The window looked out over the Columbus skyline, parking garages, office buildings, the spire of a church lit amber against the dark. I had a cup of coffee going cold in my hand and a residual ache in my lower back from 6 hours standing in the OR. I thought about $180,000. I thought about the index card taped inside my closet when I was 18. 3 columns, 3 jobs, 3 wages. I thought about mac and cheese on Thanksgiving. About Dr. Holden clapping alone in an arena. About a yellow envelope in an attic box that smelled like dust and cedar. About a woman standing up at a party to tell the truth nobody in my family would say. My father invested $180,000 in the future he chose. I invested everything I had in the future I built. His investment gave Kyle a career. Mine gave me a life. The people who tell you what you can't become are usually the ones who never became what they wanted. $180,000. 3 jobs. 1 acceptance letter hidden in an attic for 40 years. A fiancé who remembered a face from the recovery room. That's what it took for the truth to walk into that restaurant. If someone ever told you your dreams weren't worth the investment, prove them wrong the quiet way. Seriously, what would you have done in that moment? Have you ever faced a situation where someone tried to erase your truth? Tell me what you think in the comments. I really want to know. And if you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.